Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Afrikanists Assemble. Whenever working between multiple languages, one inevitably comes face to face with some word, phrase, or idea that is untranslatable. You can translate it, sure, but the shades of meaning provided by the source language are lost. These items can be both a source of frustration and fascination, showing us that indeed every language provides some meaning, some ways of knowing that others simply don't capture. Here's the question we asked our contributors this month. What is your favorite example of untranslatability or something difficult to translate in an African language, and what's so interesting about it? Let's see what intriguing linguistic nuggets they came up with.
Makadiko vateereri, ini ndinoitwa Shungu, ndinotaura chiShona, vamwe vanoti Shona, ndirwo rurimi rwaamai. Basa randinoita zuva roga roga rinosanganisira kuturikira nyaya. Tiri panyaya yemazwi anonetsa kuturikira, pane anonzi mazwi ekukanuka. Maiwe, mazwi iwayo ane dambudziko. Tisati tatombotaura dambudziko rekuturikira, pane dambudziko rekumaperengera zvakanaka. Unoona rimwe rinoiswa kasungazwi, rimwe rinodzokorodzwa varamwana pekupedzisira, richiiswa kasungazwi zvakare. Pamwe unozongoti, regai ndisiyane nazvo zvekushandisa nekuturikira mazwi aya. Kozoita iro dambudziko rekuturikira iri, hehede, unoseka, ukanzwa zvava kuturikirwa nevaparidzi. Muno muZimbabwe mune machechi mazhinji. Vaparidzi vacho vanodawo fani zvekutaura vachiturikira chirungu nechiShona. Uchiteerera vachiparidza, unenge uchiturikirawo musoro. Unozosvika pakuti ko muturikiri wacho zvava kurasika. Zvakaoma. Panhauro yandaita kusvika zvino, ndashandisa mazwi ekukanuka matanhatu. Mukazotarisa zvanyorwa muchirungu, ndangoisa chiito chacho chinotsanangura zvandanga ndichida kubuditsa pandashandisa izwi rekukanuka. Ndati kuturikira kungandinetse. ChiShona mutauro uri tonal, saka mazwi ekukanuka ndiwo mamwe ekuti izwi rimwe chetero rinogona kungosiyaniswa zvarinoreva nekudzikisa kana kukwidza izwi. Mazwi ekukanuka anondinakidza chaizvo. Pese pandinomashandisa kana kuti pandinonzwa mumwewo munhu achimashandisa, anondiratidza kurerukirwa nemutauro kwemutauri. Ini pandinomashandisa, anondirangaridza amai vangu, anondirangaridza ambuya vangu. Izvi zvinobva zvandiyeuchidza kuti mutauro, netsika nemagariro evanhu, zvinhu zvine ukochekoche hwakasimba.
My favorite examples of untranslatability in G are scientific and health items such as lycopene, dopamine, and other technological items such as computer, email, and other items which do not have their manufacturing route from Ghana. But the most interesting part of these are that we mostly use a clause, a sentence or two to explain these stuff for comprehension. But for accuracy's sake, the language allows transliteration.
I know for sure that translators are supposed to be traitors, but there are times when they themselves find it extremely difficult to translate some words. For the Yoruba language, for instance, there are onomatopic sounds that have probably no translation. Gudugbe, gudugbe, it just means something big. Balau, funfun balau. So we have expressions such as this in Yoruba. And I think Wole Soyinka made a very good attempt at translating some of these untranslatable expressions into English. For instance, ba esere soro, that is hold a dialogue with your leg, and which means run away. So he translated that to mean have a rapid dialogue with your legs. And Ifeanyi spoke no more that day. A tutoring chicken in the household of Ifeanyi, not I, not I, Emiko, not I. So there are some of these things that not only translators or interpreters find extremely difficult with the Yoruba language, because there are the whole idea of translation, there could be in-culture translation and totally out-of-culture translation. It is when you don't have similarities within the culture that it becomes untranslatable. And most of it you find in Bishop Ajayi Crowther's attempt at translating some words or expressions from English to Yoruba. But the one that still wins for me all the time is gudugbe, gudugbe. How do you translate gudugbe, gudugbe? At the worst, you're just going to say, something heavy and get on with the rest of the passage. So those would be my favorite examples of translatability, or something very difficult to translate in the Yoruba language. And the interesting thing is that they are sounds and we make them up. Gudu gudu, gudu gudu could be a kind of drum, but how do you translate that? So these are my own views about that.
The concept on translatability is peculiar in language studies, applied linguistics, particularly second language contexts, where there are more than one language in use. This randomly appears where a word is not known in the target language and it becomes difficult to call it up. You cannot call up what is not originally there. So the result will be to describe the word using a phrase, and in some contexts, a whole sentence. For example, in the Nigerian context of using the English language as a second language, new media words or technical terms found in technology, medicine, and Western education generally are usually difficult to translate, and speakers usually find themselves either describing it with its closest known word or words or objects, or by adopting the word from the target language and giving it a form in pronunciation as in the L1. The first language of the speakers, that is L1. Words like computer, for instance, in Lokåå, the language I speak, is described as the watching box. The watching box, Ķêķékékû. What is used to describe a television. And because we do not have the word in computer in Lokåå, it becomes a described term to say it is what is watched. And at this point, it could be used to confuse people except the context. Because when you say watching box, it basically refers to a television. But in this case, it could be a computer. Also, words like mota. In Hausa, you hear a Hausa speaker saying mota. This is an adoption of English word by giving it a local form. There are many other, words like that we have in English that cannot be found in our local languages. And also other local things that we have that we can't find exact words to describe them in the English language, and we become descriptive in order to explain what the word is or what the object is. You explain rather than naming it and giving it a name that it is. So that is what untranslatability means in language studies.
Daar weer is die hondskeer at Jeffrey Oarasib, or hello, my name is Jeffrey Oarasib. The thing that I like the most about an African language that is untranslatable is the fact that the tani-aihaib mamas, or the caring of the mother of the language of the Gowas, the amakaitsi, or the authenticity is that you cannot translate it, you can only say it in one certain aspect that is untranslatable, that is only understandable in the indigenous language. For example, my favorite example is my personal clan name. For example, it's Kutep, it's a springbok. But in the Kanis, Midisaugroep, or the dictionary, you get the word groep, which means springbok. So, in that instance, it is something that you inherit, either that it's a token of something that your tribe has been well known for, or even the meaning in the dictionary or the Kanis Midisaugroep is also very different, because that is what is also in hindsight what an indigenous language or an African language, it cannot be written out, it cannot be moved away from. The way that you say something and the way that is explained. It's very different because an indigenous or an African language is also, it is descriptive, it is technical, and also it is mathematical and scientifical, which means in totems and even in synonyms you can get your kaumis or your proverbs that gets forever been enshrined, and also the amakaitsi or the authenticity, it gets carried over, and then you can just do your thing, and you can, for example, I will make another example. You can get in a Khoi proverb, you can get the thing titatsin, which means me too, or even titatsin can even have the meaning of I also want to, or I also have the desire. So, in my opinion, untranslatability is very authentic. You cannot take it away from an African language, and also, to end it off, an African language has its own norm-up or its own root that gives its edge, so that it's difficult for English and other languages to be transcribed.
There are a number of words or expressions in Nigerian languages that denote cultural practices, indigenous technology, sickness, food, among others, which may not be easily translated to another language without taking the meaning out of context. For example, Igbo language, which is a major language of the people in southeast Nigeria, has such expressions. I can give some examples in Igbo. The first is Omugwo. Omugwo is a cultural practice which involves postnatal care of a nursing mother. The mother of the nursing mother or an elderly woman related to her is expected to take care of her for a while she recuperates. Whoever takes care of the nursing mother also has a reward. The exact nuances associated with this practice will be lost in any attempt to translate to another language. The second one is Iwakwa, an initiation ceremony of young men into manhood. The literal translation of Iwakwa is wearing of clothes, but this again does not capture the nuances of this very significant rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. Another word is abacha, a delicacy in Igbo land. This food is usually served in very important traditional ceremonies such as marriage, birth, coronation, funerals, among others. Some people have attempted to translate the food, abacha, as African salad because the food is basically not cooked. Most of the ingredients are eaten raw, but unlike salad, the ingredients are not vegetables. In fact, you just have very few vegetables in abacha. So an attempt to translate the equivalent to salad does not capture exactly the meaning of that food. There are also some diseases such as Ķêķékékû, which some people call Ottoh-Agede, which literally means ripen and rotten, which cannot be easily translated because the disease is believed to be contracted by magical or diabolical powers. The belief is that the sickness is transferred through diabolical means. The belief is also that no orthodox cure or medicine can be administered to the patient. It can only be cured through traditional medicine and some rituals. Translation would not be able to capture the pragmatic import of this particular disease. So in overall, we see that there are so many words in Igbo language that cannot easily be translated. An attempt to translate such words will mean that the exact nuances, the pragmatic import of the words or the expressions would be lost.
So there are many words from my language, my Ķêķékékû language, that cannot really be translated to English or Kiswahili because the meaning will not come out the same. most of the other words can be maybe, we can appropriate them to Kiswahili, but then English becomes a little bit harder. There are many of them, but the one that I'm going to talk about today is this word we say kesaisai. In Kiswahili, it can easily be translated as kubembeleza. But then when you try to translate this word into English, it doesn't come out the same because this word has many meanings. That it can mean to pamper, it can mean to try and convince. But then when we use it, of course, it is used for all those other purposes. You talk about you're pampering a child, like kesaisai. You're talking about trying to convince, so kasaisai. But then sometimes the way it's used doesn't really, I don't know how to put it. It is a very common word, I think. And normally sometimes it is even used when someone, for example, is trying, for example, to hit on a girl. So we will say, soy. Now, putting that in English is, I don't know whether it comes out the same though. I can't find the right word to say that, you just have, I don't know how to put it. I can't really translate how that is done. It could also mean that when someone is, you're trying to tell someone to do something, or you're trying to ask someone to do something for you, it's like mosoisoin, something like that. It could mean that I won't take my time trying to convince you or something, but translating that directly. And it is a very common word. The one thing that is interesting about it is that it is very commonly used. And when it is used in Kipsigis, it fits in very well. But when you try to put it in a different language, it doesn't come out just the same. I can't even try to translate it right now because I'm sure I won't get it right.
In the Jukun language, there is a word that's used to describe a person that is one's father's elder brother or one's mother's elder brother. And that word is adasho. The word is pronounced adasho. The word adasho is used to address a person that is older than your father or mother. Also, in the Jukun language, there is a word, ahwina. Ahwina refers to a masquerade that entertains during various occasions. There are different masquerades in Jukun culture, and each of these masquerades has their names. So ahwina is specific for entertainment. So unlike the English, I'm not sure if every masquerade has a name, but for Jukun ahwina, it cannot be translated into English or any other language. It's only in Jukun.
The typical example of untranslatability in African language to me is a particular statement that is being used in English. This particular statement, for me, I find it really interesting how untranslatable this statement is, because even very recently, I have been trying a number of times to translate this to non-Pidgin speakers, and it became so difficult, extremely difficult, that I asked a number of Cameroonians to help me translate, and I found out that they were also facing the same difficulties like I was facing. So the statement is, I don't soak magari, leave am, high. I don't soak magari, leave am, high. The first thing is how difficult or how this could not be translated to what could be called proper English, no matter how hard we have tried. So literally, I would say, I have soaked my gari and I've kept it to rise or to swell. I have soaked my gari and I've kept it to rise or to swell. This is the best translation I could give for a non-Pidgin speaker. And what is gari? Gari is a food. It's a kind of food eaten in Cameroon. It could be eaten cooked, and it could also be eaten while soaked in water, to be eaten with maybe milk, peanut, or sugar, or even avocado. So when soaked in water, this is when you have to soak it in water and you leave it there for some time, maybe just some few seconds, not for long anyway, and then you are able to eat it. So this statement is regularly used because gari is also regularly eaten in Cameroon. But there's also something about this particular statement, and this thing is about the mock translation about it, the mock English. And this mock English is mostly used by students because they fear using pidgin and they'll be punished in school. So it is usually, I have steeped my gari and I've allowed it to swell. I have steeped my gari and I've allowed it to swell. So this is just like a very direct translation. This is just the best translation they could get. But like I said, maybe for a non-pidgin speaker to understand, it is simply, I have soaked my gari and I've kept it to rise or to swell. So I hope this is quite understandable by non-pidgin speakers or non-Cameroon pidgin speakers.
Ntụgharị bụ isi n'otu asụsụ nsiribịa tụgharịa maọbụ sụgharịa ederede gaa n'asụsụ ọzọ, asụsụ nnabata. Ihe kacha mkpa na ntụgharị bụ ime ka mpụtara pụta ìhè n'asụsụ nnabata dịka o siri pụta ìhè n'asụsụ nsiribịa, ka ndị na-asụ asụsụ nnabata nwee nghọta dịka ndị na-asụ asụsụ nsiribịa sikwa nwee nghọta nke ha. Mgbe e nwere ndịiche n'asụsụ, omenala na mwulite sayensị na nka na ụzụ, ohere dị na a ga-enwe nsogbu ịtụgharị ụfọdụ mkpụrụ okwu ma ọ bụ echiche nke na-ebute ekweghị ntụgharị. Ekweghị ntụgharị bụ enweghị ike ịtụgharị ederede site n'otu asụsụ gaa na nke ọzọ. N'agbanyeghị nke a, ụzọ ma ọ bụ usoro a na-agbaso eme ntụgharị emeela ka enweghị ntụgharị hapụ ịdị na-apụta chi na ntụgharị. Asụsụ mbụ asụsụ Igbo nke a na-asụ n'ọwụwa anyanwụ nke Naịjirịa. E nwere ụfọdụ mkpụrụ okwu Igbo, ọkacha ndị ọkpụtọrọkpụ na okwu nsinachi Igbo dịka ụkpọ, ọgbọlọ, agamefu, dịrị gawazie, ndị na-enye nsogbu n'ịtụgharị gaa n'asụsụ ọzọ. Mana nke m ga-ahọrọ iji nye ọmụmaatụ ekweghị ntụgharị bụ otu n'ime atụmatụ okwu a kpọrọ gwam gwam gwam. Gwam 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 bụ ajụjụ a na-ajụ iji egwu. Ha gụnyere: gwam gwam gwam, gwa m ihe chere gị aka mgba n'ezi. Apịtị. Gwam gwam gwam, gwa m ihe bụ ose rie elu. Mmemme. Gwam gwam gwam, gwa m ihe eji ikpere gazuo ubi. Ọgụ. Gwam gwam gwam, gwa m ihe tiri nwata ihe n'ihu nne ya. Agụụ. O doro anya na ịtụgharị gwam 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 ndị a site n'Igbo gaa na Bekee ga-emebi mpụtara ha ma mee ka a hapụ inweta ọṅụ ha na-enweta mgbe a na-ajụ gwam gwam gwam, n'ihi na omenala na nnatarachi anyị dị iche na nke mba ndị ọzọ. Ihe kacha amasị m na gwam 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 bụ na ha na-ehiwe isi na omenala ndị. Ha bụ ajụjụ na-akpali oke nchebe echiche ime. Ha dịkwa omimi nke na-ara ahụ na nghọta ma nweekwa ọsịsa na-agbagwoju anya. Ndewo.
My favorite example of untranslatability, or something difficult to translate in an African language or languages, are bebebebebebe, ikeregwogwo, keregwo, siwo, siwo. There are such languages within Africa. The purpose of such language is to stimulate communication and perhaps engender excitement. And what is so interesting about these untranslatable language are they have no appropriate value in English translation. Therefore, any value apportioned is an estimation. B, many of them are language codes which translation cannot decode. C, some are language key and lock which can only be opened by the same language. D, they are irregularly used in conditions not admissible in English language. Therefore, they are difficult to translate. E, some are poetically used to drive home a point. Therefore, as a means or conveyor, it becomes untranslatable. Otherwise, it may swallow the value of what has been conveyed. F. Others could be exceptionally used language with exceptional meaning that is also exceptionally untranslatable. These are the reasons why some of these languages are not translatable. Thank you.
This question is one of my top favorites in Yoruba language, and we have quite a number of them. Words, phrases, sayings, and what have you that are not translatable into English. And it isn't that we can't translate them, it is that we don't have direct translation for them. So we just look for something that is closest in meaning, or that can, connote the sense that we're trying to convey with what we are saying. Now, for instance, we have this generic greeting where most of our greetings start with the phrase eku. Now, in English, we have decided to translate that as good. However, not every greeting where we say eku can actually translate as good in English. So, for instance, we say ekaro, which would be good morning. But now, the interesting one, which is one that I like very much, is ekule. How do you say ekule? It is not good house and it is not happy house as we would normally jest. So I personally have decided to, translate eku to or giving it a wider meaning so that people know what it is they're saying when they say eku, which is that greetings for something. We are acknowledging that something is going on at this time, and so we are greeting upon or for that basis. So when we say ekule, it is greetings for those of you who are in the house. Now, my favorite, and this one is owa. In Nigeria, we board public transport and you want to tell the driver or the conductor that you will be alighting at a particular bus stop. You would normally say owa. Owa, translating into English, is it is. Owa, it is. But when you look at it in the context of telling a bus driver owa, which means that you want to alight, it doesn't follow, right? So how do you translate owa to actually mean that you want to alight in English? The correlation isn't there. Now, we take that and extend it further to what we commonly now have as owambe. Owambe has been used to mean parties in Nigeria. Owambe, when you translate that, means it is there. Owanibe, it is there. So when you say owanibe, owambe, and you say that to mean party, how those two things match? So you see, the thing with language, African languages, is so beautiful that, we have these words, these things that we say, but you want to translate into English, just don't bother. Don't bother, because then you would lose the essence of what you're saying. And for owambe, what it actually means is that it is happening there. Owanibe, of which it is happening there in Yoruba, would actually be onshele nibe. But hey, it is the language, it is mobile, it is dynamic, and you're allowed to freestyle. So yes, owambe for parties, but it actually means it is there. Cheers.
An example of untranslatability. When you are working on a dead language like Old Nubian, you're constantly faced with things that are untranslatable, things for which we cannot find an analog either in modern Nubian languages or in texts from which the thing we are reading in Old Nubian could have been translated. So untranslatability is part of my daily practice. One specific form of untranslatability can be found in a number of texts that seem to be Nubian, that have been found in Soba and in Musrawat Sufra, so in what used to be the Kingdom of Alwa. These are shorter and a few longer inscriptions written in a language that looks Nubian. It's a Nubian type language. It's written in a script that is partially recognizable. It has a bunch of letters that we cannot particularly read. And it's also about topics that we can partially understand, namely referring most likely to Christianity, Christian traditions. But since these are the only texts in this language, or languages, we don't even know if it's a single language, they are as of now untranslatable. We have made a little bit of progress this year in deciphering or suggesting translations, suggesting a decipherment of 2 of the characters that are found in these texts, based on inscriptions in Banganarti that also were written in a Nubian language that is not Old Nubian, but at least written in a script that we can read. So that's an exciting development. But otherwise, we are still stuck on these texts. And it's a real question whether they can be translated in the future, because unless you find more materials, they will remain untranslatable forever.
African languages do not only use borrowed terms for imported concepts. The introduction of some institutions has stimulated a lively formation of neologisms, and many of them have been adopted and are widely used today. In the Mande language Bambara, this includes the political system of democracy, for which there are at least 4 or 5 neologisms in addition to the loanword demokarasi. They are all complex words, compounds containing the word fanga, force or power. Foroba fanga, beje fanga, jemu fanga, benkan fanga, beya fanga. Let us examine their components. Foroba, the first component of foroba fanga, is translated as public, drawn on foroba, big field. In rural Mali, a foroba is cultivated by all inhabitants of a village, in addition to their respective individual fields, and the village as a whole is the beneficiary of its yield. Beje fanga and beya fanga both designate power that unites all together and that is based on the majority of voices. The components of this word are be, all, je, unite, and fanga, power. So, a power that unites everybody. Beya, in beya fanga, is an abstract of be, all, resulting in a word that could be translated as entirety or majority. The 2 remaining terms stress the need for debates. Jemu fanga includes jemu, speech. It is implicit in the other one, benkan fanga, freely translated as power upon agreement, for any agreement requires foregoing debates. The question now is, which concept of democracy do Bambara speakers have when using one or another of the terms? Do the speakers or writers think about the inclusion of everybody's work for the benefit of all? Or is it simply the power based on the majority's opinion? Or are discussion and agreement the overriding factors in the Bambara concept of democracy? I sincerely hope that semantic studies not only on this and similar contested concepts will be undertaken soon in this beautiful language.
The concept of untranslatability is a reality that is a problem of study for translation studies scholars and a nightmare for a translation professional. It is a common occurrence when working in between languages to find oneself encountered with simple yet complex concepts that are part of the everyday in language A and are totally alien in a language B. Oftentimes we hear of the aspects of loss and gain in translation, or better still, the phrase lost in translation. Put together, these reflect at a very practical level the manifestation of untranslatability tied to the linguistic as well as the cultural aspects of the languages at play. As a translator who has studied translations in African languages, as well as having translated numerous documents mostly from English into Swahili and Gikuyu, I've had my fair share of encounters with this aspect. The lexical depth between English and a language like Gikuyu in some of the fields like technology, medicine, and the legal is quite profound. On the other hand, there are concepts that exist in this Gikuyu language that don't have equivalence or near equivalence in English. And this binary comparison doesn't in any way intimate superiority vis-a-vis an inferiority of any of these languages, but rather goes to show that a perfect translation, that which is natural, faithful, or equivalent, is impossible to achieve. One of my earliest tasks as a translator was working between Gikuyu and English, and I had to translate a historical book titled Ķêķékékû, which loosely translates into the prophecy of Ķêķékékû. One of the words that I proved challenging to render was a term that he used to provide a description of the colonizers, the skin tone of the colonizers in his prophecies, and he used the term Ķêķékékû, in plural form Ķêķékékû, rendering these in a manner that did not impute negativity that wasn't intended in the original was quite a challenge. Ķêķékékû was used for lack of a word in Gikuyu to describe the Caucasian skin color. The closest Ķêķékékû would come in describing this skin tone is to make reference to the pink frog that is mostly found in banana plantations. This, considering that the prophecy was made before the advent of the colonial masters in Kenya, made it almost impossible for the locals to appreciate, but rather for a translator in 2014, that was not easy considering the post-colonial context, and as such, it had to be recreated in a manner that not only captured the intended original meaning, but also retained some of the current and all the contemporary aspects that are related to colonialism and the colonial experience in Kenya.
My favorite example of untranslatability lies in two Hausa words, Kwadayi and Kilishi. For the word Kwadayi, a Nigerian English word, long throat, was invented to capture the idea of one's desire to eat food or drinks, especially from people's houses or at occasions one is not invited to. No matter how hard I try, I may only be able to give an idea of what Kwadayi means, but I may never succeed in making one understand the concept as a native speaker would. Another of such untranslatable words in Hausa is Kilishi. Once in a WhatsApp group, there was a debate about what Kilishi means in English, but all suggestions submitted failed to meet the actual definition of that kind of dried meat. I think there are lots of cuisines and drinks that have defied translation, and they carry their names into whichever language they are exported to. On the whole, untranslatability becomes glaring whenever there is an attempt to translate poetry. In this sense, many meanings are lost in translation. Perhaps that is what the notable American poet Robert Frost referred to in his description of poetry as poetry is what gets lost in translation. Untranslatability points to the uniqueness of every language. Thank you.
Those are all the contributions we received for this month's question. What did you think of the examples they provided? What are your favorite words or phrases in languages you know that are untranslatable? Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you have any requests for questions we should pose to our contributors, please feel free to leave them in the comments. See you next month.